Secret origins of Highgarden? Really? Really? I mean, we all know and love the Tyrells from the shows and books, and they're fine and all, but secret origins? I mean, are they just upjumped stewards who were elevated to lords after all the gardeners were burned by Aegon and his sisters at the Field of Fire? Well, yes, absolutely. Absolutely they are. But they're upjumped stewards of one of the very oldest castles in all of Westeros. Because Highgarden was built by Garth Garth Greenhand himself. For his firstborn son, Garth Gardener I, and his progeny. And there's a lot of progeny when it comes to Garth and the Gardeners. And we are talking old, the very first days of the First Men, because of course the tales say that Garth the Green either led the First Men across the Arm of Dorne, or else he was already there in Westeros before the First Men, wandering around and, well, we know what he was doing. So yes, when we speak of the founding of Highgarden and House Gardener, these are the very oldest stories of the First Men. And along those same lines, Garth the Green is also remembered as being the first High King of the First Men, with his authority then passing on to the Gardeners of Highgarden, who subsequently ruled as the most powerful kings in the Reach and arguably all of Westeros for thousands of years. Again, until Aegon and his sisters came with their dragons. Most mysteriously, the customs, names, symbols, and traditions of Highgarden and the Gardeners paint a very different picture of early First Man Weirwood culture than is practiced in the North. And what I mean by that is that the northern houses and the wildlings have both been worshipping the old gods of the Weirwood seemingly since the dawn of days. But the Weirwood worship described in the early days of Highgarden speaks of living tree thrones that are not in caves, of magic trees with leaves like green hands instead of the leaves like bloody red hands that we see on the Weirwoods of today, and of green men planting Weirwoods in God's woods and ruling openly as kings, which is a far cry from the foggy rumors of a few surviving green men on the Isle of Faces who really don't like company unless your name is Howland Reed or there is prophecy involved. Now, there's definitely some good old timeline heresy implied here because we're told elsewhere that the First Men only converted to the worship of the old gods of the Weirwood trees after they signed the pact with the Children of the Forest. But these tales from the Reach of the very First Men have them being ruled by a Green Man king from a castle that he built around 3 intertwined Weirwoods. So both of these things cannot be true. And that means that yes, Highgarden does have secret origins. But what's not a secret is that you can get not 1, but 2 Garth the Green t-shirts on our Bonfire web store in the link below the video. And thanks very much for clicking on this video, for giving it the thumbs up, making sure you're subscribed, leaving a comment with your thoughts after it's done, and for watching all the way to the end where all the good stuff is. So let's get this party in a Highgarden started. Alright, so let's start off with having a look around the garden at the wiki of it all, the basic facts and figures and hedgerows. So Highgarden is not a true city. Westeros actually only has five official cities, which are, in descending order of size, Old Town, King's Landing, Lannisport, Goldtown, and White Harbor. So although it isn't a city, quote unquote, it does seem to be a pretty large castle, and it rules / keeps safe just an extensive area of countryside all around the castle. There's farmlands and orchards and fields of flowers, so there's almost certainly a town-like substance outside the castle walls, and there's definitely people living all through the countryside. So it's a hugely populous area despite not being a city, and it sits at a very strategic location on a broad hill beside the Mander at the crossroad of 2 important roads in the Reach. Overall, the vibes in this area are basically France to Holland. They got fields of golden roses, so that reminds me of Holland. And the Reach in general definitely seems like the France of Westeros.
I don't know who you are, where you're from, but
France? We come from France?
So the Highgarden castle that we see is a mixture of Andal and First Man construction because it's very old. And as usual, it's pointed out that the First Men built the square and squat towers, and the Andals built the round and soaring ones. Castle Highgarden has 3 white crenellated walls of increasing height, the first of which was built by Mern II Gardener right as the Andals were invading. Now, famously, the Gardener kings, instead of fighting the Andals, they made treaties and marriage pacts. So instead of having that first wall destroyed and their castle burned down, and all those roses, they instead welcomed the Andals and got to build 2 more walls, so now they have 3. King Garth IX Gardener actually built the Andals a sept, which is rivaled only by the Sept of Baelor and the Starry Sept of Old Town. Although it is specifically said that King Garth IX continued to worship Garth in the Godswood, or whatever they do in the Godswood. And King Garth IX also managed to have the builders slip more than a few Garth the Greens into the stained glass windows at the sept at Highgarden. And of course, George is actually mimicking the tradition of green man sculptures and stuff all over European cathedrals and churches. So sometime shortly after this zipping up of first-man gardeners and incoming Andals, we have the Tyrells becoming the hereditary stewards of the Castle Highgarden, where they laid in wait like snakes in the grass, ready to turn tail to Aegon the Conqueror. Anyways, I'll stop throwing them under the bus. They're fine. And one of the coolest facts about Highgarden is that it has a huge briar hedge labyrinth in between the outer wall and the middle wall. It was originally designed to confound invaders, and I definitely don't think you want to get hemmed up in the briar hedge. So that would work. But now in these more peaceful times, it's probably mostly serving as a very cool maze for the kids at the Harvest Festival. All right, so we've looked around Highgarden everywhere, except for the garden in the middle of the castle, so let's talk about the three singers. Because yes, at the center of all of this is the Godswood, which has not one weirwood, but three, and they are intertwined. They've grown together, and that's actually not something that we've ever seen or heard about anywhere else in Westeros. This is also the only story of anyone growing or planting, quote-unquote, a weirwood tree of any kind. It's the only story about that working. We only hear about the unsuccessful attempt in the Eyrie to transplant a weirwood, I would think is what they're doing, since we've never seen any weirwood seeds. Anyway, point is, yeah, Garth the Green, the only person ever said to have planted a weirwood. And he planted three, and they've grown together. And they're called the Three Singers. That obviously reminds us of the true name of the Children of the Forest, which is those who sing the Song of Earth. So we have to wonder, were there singers, were there Children of the Forest present when Garth first planted these weirwoods or caused them to grow? And or do you use song magic of some kind? Like, do they literally sing the Song of Earth and cause the tree to grow or grow a face? I mean, something like that could make sense. And it's important to note that Garth the Green is planting these weirwoods when he builds the castle. So really, the castle is built around the weirwood trees. And that seems to be a pattern amongst all the early First Men. For example, the legends say that the Winterfell heart tree saw Brandon the Builder lay the first stone. And the castle is very clearly built around the Godswood, which is above the crypts. That's kind of the center of the castle. So yeah, Garth the Green is planting weirwoods, building a castle to guard them, essentially, and then his progeny rule from there. So as to Garth the Green, he is famously described exactly like the Green Men on the Isle of Faces. Green skin, green hair, antlers like a stag, and both Garth the Green and the Green Men are said to have magic power over weirwood trees. So we don't yet know exactly what the real truth of the Green Men is. On House of the Dragon, at least, we have seen some sort of clip-clopping Carnuno's friend, and I do think there is something like that on the Isle of Faces. So it stands to reason that Garth the Green is, the same sort of Carnuno's friend. But whatever the truth of the Green Men turns out to be in the books, they certainly seem like they would be related to the Children of the Forest, right? After all, both the Green Men and the Children of the Forest is essentially a case of George Martin riffing off of European nature folklore. Both the Green Men and the Children of the Forest are therianthropes, meaning human-animal hybrids, and they both live much closer to nature than humans. Both the Green Men and the Children are specifically associated with weirwood trees, and both the Green Men and the Children are present on the Isle of Faces for the Pact. So there's a lot of overlap there, strong overlap. And then, of course, we have to look at the children, the notable children of Garth the Green. A couple of those are flat out said to have skin changer powers. Rose of Red Lake, of course, is said to be able to skin change cranes, and so are her descendants of House Crane. Shout out to the bird skin changers, gotta love that. And then Brandon of the Bloody Blade is said to be the ancestor of Brandon the Builder and the Starks, who famously are wargs, going back a long time, and sometimes green seers. Brandon of the Bloody Blade is said to have bloodied his blade at Red Lake, which used to be called Blue Lake, but he killed so many Children of the Forest that now it's Red Lake. However, this whole bloody blade thing seems to be a sexual metaphor based on Barbary Destin's monologue in the Winterfell Crypts, her famous monologue to Theon. And there she's talking about Brandon, Ned's older brother, who loved to bloody his blade, meaning, again, a sexual metaphor. And that means that the original Brandon Bloody Blade was more likely interbreeding with Children of the Forest at Red Lake, which again is where House Crane, a family of skin changers, exists to this day. And again, the Starks have a very strong skin changing gene in their bloodline, so they obviously intermarried with children of the forest or green men a long time back. Then we've got some other children of Garth the Green who have weird magics associated with animals, such as Ellen Eversweet, who made a pact with the king of the bees and then cared for the bees. So there's a little hive mind symbolism there. And then Boris Bulwer, he drank bull's blood to gain the strength of 20 men and actually grew a pair of bull horns on his head. Harlan the Hunter and Herndon of the Horn, they slept with the wood switch whenever the moon was full, and in doing so, stayed forever young, at least for a long time. However, their names are really just a scramble of Herne the Hunter, who has a horn, and also stag antlers, and essentially he is a dead version of the classic Cernunnos green man folklore archetype. And then circling back to the Bulwer fellow who grew the horns out of his head, that's just another type of horned god. So lots of clues about stag people, horned gods, green men, skin changers, people with powers over animals. And then we also have Floris the Fox, who was clever and married 3 men, so maybe she was a skin changer. And then there was that one party where things got a little loose and Garth the Green ended up siring John the Oak on a giantess. So yeah, you never know. Garth doesn't know the word no, famously. And then a couple weeks ago, in the video about the origin of the Casterlys, thanks for watching, we talked about Rowan Goldtree, daughter of Garth, and her legend seems to be about children of the forest marrying the first Casterlys at Casterly Rock. Just trust me, it makes sense. Check out the video if you missed it. But even if we just take the legend at face value, she's a daughter of Garth who was associated with a magic tree. She was buried in a hill to grow a magic tree. So then we have the Oakenseat. It's a living tree throne that is not said to be underground, which you'd think they would say that if it was underground, but they do not. They just say that it is a throne grown from a living oak by Garth the Green for his progeny to sit on. So just like the 3 singers, it's some sort of magical tree thing that Garth grew. And that begs the question, was this really just a weirwood throne above ground that was misremembered as an oaken throne? Either that or oak trees and other trees other than weirwoods can be used for magic. So that could be possible. And in either scenario, we have to wonder, was this some kind of green seeing from these early gardener kings who sit on this living tree throne? It certainly could have been. All right, for the culture. We're doing it for the culture, because the culture around here is pretty strange, as you can see. So, in the early days of the Reach, we have, running around, green men, weirwood trees, unique weirwood trees, I would add. Almost certainly children of the forest. Abundant signs of skin changing and green seeing. Some sort of mysterious living oak tree throne, which again does not seem to be down in a cave. And general witchcraft and human-animal hybrid stuff. And this is the center of the earliest first man culture, the very center, the beginning of it. And these kings of Highgarden, the Gardener kings, they were the greatest kings in all of southern Westeros and perhaps all of Westeros. And not only that, all the major houses in the Reach of first men descent claim to descend from Garth the Green and one of his special children. Like I said a minute ago, maybe even the Starks too, and also maybe the Casterlys. Check out the Casterly video. And then we have Uthor of the High Tower, the very first Hightower Lord of record. Well, he's marrying a daughter of Garth the Green, Maris the Most Fair, and then working with Brandon the Builder, who is probably a Child of the Forest hybrid, or at least was taken to learn the magic of the Children of the Forest, according to legend. One of Uthor's sons, Paramore the Twisted, is the one who started the Citadel, and he was consulting with the Children of the Forest, almost certainly at the Isle of Ravens, where there is a very old weirwood tree. And so, we have to ask, were the very first kings of the first men green men, green seers, green man human hybrids, Child of the Forest human hybrids? Seems like all of these things, or some of these things, may be true. Then we have Durran Godsgrieve and the Durrandon kings of the Stormlands. They are at least dressing up like green men. And some of the Durrandon kings apparently befriended the Children of the Forest, including during the Andal invasion when a Durrandon king sought out the children, kind of like the last hero did, and then formed something called the Weirwood Alliance with the Children of the Forest that won many battles against the Andals. Then we have this loose bit of folklore that's sort of floating around the Riverlands of the Green King of the God's Eye. We don't know who that was or what he did, but it sounds like some sort of green man or green seer king, or at the very least, someone trying to play off of the perceived authority of such green man and green seer kings to convey kingship upon himself. We all know about the Stark warg kings, who also fought other warg kings in the north. We have the legends of the Marsh kings in the Neck. They rode to battle on the backs of lizard lions, which seemed like some weird sort of crocodile type thing. And you can't ride crocodiles without magic, I think that's safe to say. And so taken all together, These people in the Reach, these first men, they really don't sound like people that need to be converted to worship of the Weirwood trees. And it's actually worse than that, because I believe what they are practicing in the Reach, these are the original Weirwood customs. All right, equipment change. The other Green Man shirt that we have in the bonfire store, here it is. Green Sia, smoking. He's a smoking Green Man. So the Green Hand, time to talk about the Green Hand, which is the sigil of the gardeners, of course. And I did make a longer video about the topic we're about to crack open called The Green Weirwoods. And that video is in turn based in part on an awesome video by Crowfood's daughter of the Disputed Lands YouTube channel called The Green Men of the God's Eye. And this theory is also based in part on this calendar art, which came out after Crowfood's daughter's video, which makes her insight that much more impressive. But the point is, this art seems to show a weirwood tree with a non-bloody face and green leaves. So look, I know the leaves are a little bit impressionistic in style, but clearly they are green. There are no red leaves anywhere, not on the ground, not in the branches. And you'll notice that the weirwood face has no blood. So these weirwood trees are different, and I think we can assume this is the Isle of Faces because it's really the only place that Rhaegar and Lyanna could be. And of course, Howland Reed visited the Isle of Faces right before he came to Harrenhal, and right before Rhaegar and Lyanna disappeared. So yeah, check out my RLJ videos for that story. So this is the Isle of Faces. These are weirwood trees, which again, do not have red leaves and do not have blood coming out of their faces. So a non-bloody face might mean not carved, but rather a magic tree face, one that grew out of the trunk through magic. And the green leaves, although they, again, are impressionist in this picture, those would be leaves like green hands, because we know that the weirwood leaves now look like red, bloody hands. So think about this. Green men would probably have green blood, since they have green skin and green hair. So these must be, on the Isle of Faces, Green Man weirwoods. They're weirwood trees that green men hook into in some sort of symbiotic relationship. So the blood sap that is coursing through the trees here is green, like the green men. And that's as opposed to the other weirwood trees that we see, which are hooked up to humans or children of the forest, both of whom seem to have red blood. So yeah, these might be the original form of the weirwood trees on the Isle of Faces. That makes sense. Now, when we say leaves like green hands, obviously, Garth Greenhand, who planted weirwood trees. He seems to be a green man, so the weirwoods that he planted, they might have had green hand leaves too, originally. The gardeners, again, have that green hand on white on their sigil, and that's essentially what these original OG weirwoods look like. White bark, leaves like green hands, and so that's their sigil. There's also an Order of the Green Hand, which is a knightly order formed in the Reach. And we don't know whether that's post-Andal, because they're knights and the Andals brought knighthood, or whether this might be an older order of warriors, a warrior class called the Green Hand, that eventually evolved into a knightly class. But they're a bunch of Green Man warriors dedicated to Garth and the Green Men. So next we have the fact that the word Garth is actually interchangeable with the word weir in certain contexts, such as when you are fishing. So a wooden fish trap set up over a river can be called either a fish garth or a fishing weir. And George even refers to this concept when he describes the weirwoods as being not moved by the river of time, just as a fishing weir or fish garth stretches across a river but is not moved by the flow. And that means Garth Greenhand could also be Weir Greenhand, which is what these original weirwood trees seem to be, weirwoods with leaves like green hands. And similarly, Weirwood Tree could be Garthwood Tree, and that's what they are. They're the weirwood trees of the Green Men, and that means that Garth is essentially named after his tree. So all of that basically fits with the idea that the original weirwoods were hooked up to green men in some sort of symbiotic green blood exchanging relationship. That, I think, is the truth here. And oh, we're not done with the name Garth, because a cloister garth is a name for a central garden in a medieval castle or monastery. So very like a godswood. Basically, it is a godswood. And these cloister garths frequently do have a central tree, which is usually meant to symbolize the tree of life in the Garden of Eden. So a godswood is a garth. It's a garth garden, and it has garth trees in it, and also green garth green men. Well, I think I've made the wordplay clear. The names give it all away. The original weirwoods had green hand leaves, and they were used by green men. with green blood. Now, what about the Oakenseat, this living tree throne? Oak trees have green leaves, so again, was this misremembered? Was this in fact an above-ground tree throne of one of these original weirwoods? The Oakenseat was, after all, destroyed by the Dornish centuries and centuries ago, so there could be a fog of history thing. And another thing we don't know about the Oakenseat is where it was. Was it in the Godswood growing out of the ground? Did the Gardener Kings rule from the Godswood? It's really hard to say for sure, so let me know in the comments what you think about the Oakenseat. And then finally, last point in this section that I will raise is the Night Fort, because the Night Fort is the only other place where we've seen a Weirwood face that isn't bleeding, and that Weirwood face talks. Now we have the information we need to answer the question, what was the first religion of the first men? So think about this. If these first Weirwoods have non-carved tree faces that can talk like the Night Fort Weirwood, then you can really see why the castle is built around the Godswood. These first Gardener Kings might have been more like keepers of this talking Weirwood tree, or the triple talking Weirwood tree. The Garth Gardeners, if you will, the gardeners of the Garth tree. So perhaps their authority, their kingly authority, is really more acting as an agent of the green men who are, underground or inside the tree or whatever, making the tree face talk and dispensing wisdom. Or perhaps the green men themselves were the kings talking to the talking tree in the Godswood. Either way, the trees talk and the people listen, and then they form knightly orders and castles to protect them. So yeah, the people are serving the trees. And so basically all the Weirwood practices that we see in the north seem like a fallen form of this original stuff. The trees now bleed red blood because the humans are using them, not green men. And since the humans lack the natural symbiotic connection with the Weirwood trees that the green men would have had, the green seers can no longer make the tree faces talk. And the tree faces seemingly have to be carved into the tree instead of forming naturally. And think about the way that Bran tries to make the Weirwood talk. He has the instinct to do it, and he can almost do it. He can just barely make the leaves rustle on the wind, but he can't make the face talk. But the fact that he wants to seems like yet another clue that at one point that's how it worked. And on the other side of the equation, a lot of people do try to listen to the Weirwood trees as if they're about to talk. And they do this when they pray in the Godswood to the trees, who are their gods. Then we have the Night's Watch, the people who saved Westeros from the Long Night with the help of the Children of the Forest. Well, they prayed to trees, the original ones who were first men before the coming of the Andals. They all would have sworn their oaths to the Weirwood. They're praying to the Weirwood, and they have the only other talking tree face that we've ever seen buried under the Night Fort, under the wall. And it accepts the Night's Watch vows like a passcode. So check out my Night Fort and Bran the Builder videos for more on the Black Gate. But basically the Night's Watch seems like a dead and black version of the Knightly Order of the Green Hand. They're an order of warriors helped by the Children of the Forest, trying to protect magical Weirwood trees that talk and have castles built around them, again, for protection. So hopefully you can see the picture that George seems to be depicting here with all this Reach folklore compared to all the other Weirwood folklore. It really does seem like a before and after. All right, so what happened to these poor, bleeding, screaming trees? Why are they so serious, if you will? So not even serious, they're more often described as angry or scary, or even as laughing, which seems kind of messed up when there's like blood pouring out of your mouth. So yeah, the Weirwood trees don't look happy now. It seems like something happened to them, and we've got this before and after picture with all this green hand, green man mythology. So we definitely don't have time for the full version of this theory. Check out the Green Weirwoods and Azor Ahai and the Weirwood Net. But you can already see the basics of it just with what I've laid out here. There's a before and an after, so something must have happened in the middle. And that something involves green men no longer using the Weirwoods except for on the Isle of Faces, and humans starting to use them. So in terms of theme and symbolism, this is kind of like the Weirwood Net, if you will, being altered or defiled or even poisoned or burned. And what I think this comes down to is Azor Ahai's murder of Nissa Nissa. Nissa Nissa, I believe, was the key because she was a child of the forest. And what Azor Ahai was trying to do was break into the Weirwood Net and steal the power of the old gods for himself. You can also check out the Weirwood Goddesses live stream for the full Nissa Nissa was a child of the forest thing. I'm pretty confident in that. There's a lot of evidence for it. And so yeah, Azor Ahai's murder of Nissa Nissa, this is a blood magic ritual which allows Azor Ahai to break into the Weirwood Net, and the effect is that it is defiled. Now the reason I mention this real quick at the end of the video is because there are some parallels with House Gardener that follow this pattern. So for example, the Field of Fire a giant green field, and all of the Greenhand knights, they were burned by a dragon and a conqueror. That's Azor Ahai, a dragon and a conqueror, burning the Weirwood net so that he can become king. The Dragon Kings took over for the Greenhand Kings after that. And this change is reflected on the gold coinage. Before Aegon, the gold coins had green hands on them, and after Aegon, they have dragons on them. Another echo is when Stannis, posing as Azor Ahai, uses dark sorcery to murder Renly, who is dressed up as the Green Man because he's adopted the colors of Highgarden. And at the same time, Stannis, posing as Azor Ahai, manages to burn Renly's green tent that was described as a magical castle alive with light. So that's another symbol of the Weirwood net, the green tent being burned. And when this happens, Renly loses all power, just like the Gardener Kings. The new lords that are elevated serve Stannis, just as the Tyrells are serving the Targaryens. And then, final parallel, the Oakenseat, as I mentioned, chopped apart and burned by the Dornish, who are fiery serpents. And that's basically the next best thing to a dragon. So thanks for watching, folks. I've been David Lightbringer. Those are the secret origins of Highgarden and the Green Man and the First Man and all this Weirwood stuff. So if you want a Green Man t-shirt, check out the link below. And praise God.